Frigid rain fell in great gouts onto the neon-soaked streets of Tokyo. As Detective Satoshi would later remark, it was a perfect night for a murder. But murder wasn't on Akutami's mind as he traipsed down the empty midnight streets under the protection of his black umbrella. Well, except maybe the murder of his boss. You could see the exhaustion in the young salaryman's eyes and the dark circles below them. This was his 5th night pulling a late one at the office. His manager had yelled at him in front of the entire bullpen, reducing him to a quivering, humiliated wreck. Since then, he'd been working overtime with no extra pay as penance. He couldn't afford to lose this job, even if the company works him like a dog. With the rain hammering down on his umbrella, he couldn't even summon the energy to cry. This wasn't the life he envisioned for himself, just surviving, going back to his shoebox apartment to watch TV, eat instant meals, and sleep. His parents were always pressuring him about grandkids, but it's not like he had any time to date. If only he could meet someone. Lost in thought, he turned into a smaller alley, surrounded by grocery stores and ramen shops that had been closed for hours. Figures. He'd need to settle for instant at home. But before he could fully slip into the usual rhythms of dazed self-pity, Akutami was jogged from the stupor by an unfamiliar sight. A woman, standing alone, breaking the continuity of the alley's dull gray with the bright cherry red of her umbrella. Could it be that someone was about to answer his prayers? He was frozen where he stood as the woman approached him. She looked about his age and attractive, in neat professional business attire with long black hair. She had a surgical mask over her face, not uncommon before the pandemic and even more common now. Akutami felt his heart pounding behind the front of his cheap suit as she approached. Her perfume smelled like cherry blossoms.
"Hello there,"
she said. Her voice was like smooth jazz over a hot cup of coffee. It felt like there was a clenched fist in his throat. Was she really talking to him?
Do you think I'm pretty?"
she asked. Those words alone almost gave Akutami a heart attack. She was like a romanceable NPC in the visual novels he loved playing on his days off. He never dared to imagine that a girl like that would actually approach him.
Yes, of course I think you're pretty,"
he stammered out, feeling like a fool. She cocked her head after that, almost surprised.
"Really?"
He couldn't even summon the words, just frantic nods, his face bloody red. She slowly reached up to her face with her left hand, hooking her finger around the elastic that bound one side of the mask to her left ear. In a fluid, practiced motion, she removed the mask and smiled. If you could call that a smile.
"Am I still pretty now?"
Akutami stepped back, his umbrella falling from his limp hand and crashing down to the sodden asphalt. His jaw hung open in horror at the sight in front of him. The woman's face was a ruin, her cheeks carved with deep trenches from the corners of her mouth to the back edges of her jawbone, exposing all of her teeth, glistening with saliva. There were no words. Before he even knew what was happening, he was letting out an animalistic screech of pure terror, and that seemed to suffice as an answer. The disfigured woman's hand twisted and cracked, accommodating the splitting and growing of new bones beneath the skin. Her distal phalanges, the bones at the tip of her fingers, pressed out of the flesh and the nails, lengthening and sharpening into razor-edged points in an instant. The last thing Akutami saw was a flash in the dark as those claws whipped across his face and neck, and the ground below rushed up to meet him, the rain sluicing his body into the gutter like it had never been there at all. The thoughts that were fading, trapped in the prison of his skull, were that at least he wouldn't have to go to work tomorrow. The next morning, the entire street was cordoned off with caution tape, an ant's nest of police activity. Detectives took notes and CSI units collected samples. Nearby, a police commissioner spoke to the press, heading off rumors that this was yet another victim in the crime spree of an uncaught criminal, one the local tabloids were calling the Tokyo Slasher, even though it was. Or at least that's what it was to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. To myself and other members of the SCP Foundation, this was another textbook incident caused by SCP-6979. And before I say another word, I invite you to pause for a moment. Everything that you're currently thinking, leave that at the door. When I first began investigating the archival files on this case, I was expecting yet another malevolent anomaly that killed indiscriminately for little more than its own amusement. And if you believed that too, I invite you to listen closer. Because nothing could prepare you for the strange and unsettling turns that this particular case takes, or the fact that what seems like a single supernatural killer prowling the alleys of Tokyo is but one thread that leads to some of the darkest parts of Japan's history. With that said, steel yourself. Let's continue. Murders of this nature can be tentatively tracked back to the 17th century in Japan, though of course it's impossible to know which were a result of anomalous means and which were simply human murderers. Thankfully, in the modern era, we have an easy way to differentiate. Attacks from SCP-6979 tend to occur in areas with high concentrations of Akiva radiation, the ambient result of high levels of religious belief. There's also a large number of lambda particles, more on those later, and a generally aberrant Hume level, suggesting a weakening of the fabric of reality itself when the SCP-6979 being appears. Foundation agents also closely studied the files of the Imperial Japanese Anomalous Matters Examination Agency, or IJAMEA. This was the Japanese Foundation equivalent that operated in Imperial Japan up to the end of World War II, when the regime collapsed. Unsurprisingly, amongst all the other real-life yokai that the group had files on, there was considerable documentation on the attacks by a being that sounded eerily consistent with SCP-6979. Of course, anyone with a passing familiarity with Japanese urban legends would likely be screaming at the screen right now, waiting for me to say two extremely important words: Kuchisake Onna, known in English as the slit-mouthed woman. She's a fixture of modern Japanese boogeymen, causing mass hysteria during the 1970s. There were reports of a mysterious woman wearing a surgical mask approaching children circulating among the whisper network of schoolyards and concerned parents. Supposed encounters with her play out almost exactly like the scenario we described with the unfortunate salaryman Akutami earlier in the case. She'll approach and ask a person, typically a man, whether they think she's pretty. If they say yes, she'll remove her mask and reveal her extensive facial disfigurement. If the person says no or gives any reaction that could be perceived as displeasure, she'll kill them there and then. If they maintain that their answer is a yes to placate her, she'll mutilate their face much like her own, because why wouldn't everyone want to look pretty? Origins of the legend vary. Some say she was a woman made hideous by botched plastic surgery. Others claim she's the yurei, or vengeful ghost, of a samurai's wife. When she was found in the arms of another man, the cruel samurai slashed her face so that no other man would ever find her beautiful again. Now she prowls modern Japan, taking revenge against lustful men for what was done to her. Only one part of that story is true. She is, in fact, taking revenge, but the one who wronged her certainly wasn't a lover or a samurai. With a working knowledge of what was going on here, it then became the Foundation's goal to figure out a way to contain this vengeful spirit and stop the killings. But there were two problems. The first was that she had a knack for selecting victims in places with no physical witnesses, and the second, that she had the ability to be selectively intangible. It's impossible to put cuffs on an entity that can just disappear. In order to bind SCP-6979, the Foundation was forced to overcome some of their biases against magic and mysticism to work with a local group of interest, the Shushu-in, or Collecting Agency in English. This smaller group is made up largely of powerful esoteric Shinto and Shugendo practitioners. They perform actions similar to the Foundation, but on a much more local scale, relying on traditional rituals and folk methods rather than the technology the Foundation often employs. Working with Foundation resources and technology, Shushu-in experts devised a ritual that would let a mobile task force ambush SCP-6979 and potentially even capture her. They algorithmically selected the most probable location for an SCP-6979 emergence. Then, they arranged a team of task force operatives wearing special visors that would prevent the anomaly from automatically detecting she was being viewed by a third party. A member of D-Class personnel was selected as the perfect bait. He was provided with a collar that would prevent him from giving in to any kind of psychological compulsion that the appearance of SCP-6979 might cause. He was also given very specific instructions on the dialogue tree of a typical conversation with the anomaly. This way, he could avoid talking himself into his own death before he'd gotten any of the answers that the Foundation wanted. The whole location was littered with both esoteric talismans and Scranton reality anchors in hopes of preventing the spirit from demanifesting in the face of the Foundation's ambush. But the best-laid plans of mice and anomalous containment experts go often awry. As predicted, SCP-6979 did indeed manifest and attempt to do her song and dance with the D-Class. After she removed her mask, though, things got strange. The D-Class did exactly what he was instructed to do, attempting to ask her questions about whether she was the real Kuchisake Onna. Clearly, she didn't much appreciate him changing the topic and immediately getting into asking such personal questions. Despite the attempts of the mobile task force and their ritually strengthened equipment to stop her, she began to disappear again. Worrying that failure could mean death, the D-Class panicked, reached out, and grabbed the anomaly. She didn't attempt to kill him. Instead, he just phased out of existence with her and was declared dead when he didn't appear again. For a couple of months, anyway. Because the most shocking thing that happened, and the first major twist in this case, was that the D-Class reappeared, and he reappeared with video footage. So begins the first bizarre twist in our tale, but not the last. As was standard procedure for these kinds of operations, a small GoPro-style camera was fixed to the D-Class before the ambush attempt in order to gather the maximum amount of data in the event of a catastrophic outcome. When the D-Class regained a sense of consciousness after demanifesting, he realized that he was in what seemed almost like a dark mirror to the Tokyo he knew. Old-fashioned machiya houses, a blood-red sky, black water, the ground covered in a static flurry of ash and soot, and he wasn't alone. It was SCP-6979, but she looked different in a number of subtle ways. Instead of modern attire, she was wearing a shiro shozoku, an old-fashioned burial kimono. Her hair was longer, both of her hands had become claws, and nothing covered her scarred face. Strangely though, while she was confused that the D-Class was there, she didn't seem aggressive, just standoffish, accusing him of being a servant of the Emperor. But as the D-Class continued to follow SCP-6979 around this strange alternate dimension, he began to discover some fascinating things. The place where he was now trapped was Momonokai, the domain of the yokai, a spiritual counterpart to the world of flesh that the rest of us inhabit. The entities of this world don't, as a matter of course, prey on humans, but they require human belief in order to survive. The lambda particles, the Foundation learned, were the metaphysical traces of folk belief as a concept in humans, and SCP-6979 had, in essence, taken the form of Kuchisake Onna in order to preserve belief in herself. But what had happened to the world of Momonokai? Why was it a desolate wasteland? These were questions that the anomaly herself knew the answers to, but discovering the truth led the SCP Foundation to some extremely disturbing conclusions. It turned out that this vengeful spirit had every reason to want to get revenge on the human world. During World War II, the previously mentioned Imperial Japanese Anomalous Matters Examination Agency led a violent campaign into an extra-dimensional space. They slaughtered countless inhabitants and enslaved up to 1,000 entities to create what they called the Yokai Battalion, weaponized Japanese spirits intended to terrify and kill victims in occupied China. It seemed like an excellent idea to the nationalistic sensibilities of Imperial Japan, but it would soon prove to be a disaster. Dragged into corporeal reality, it turned out that many in the Yokai Battalion were just as vulnerable to bullets as any human being. As a result, much of the battalion were slaughtered as quickly as they entered active combat. The project was deemed a failure, given the amount of time and resources it took to train these anomalous creatures. But the damage had already been done to Momonokai, with the majority of its population brutally slaughtered by the occupying forces. In what felt almost like an act of spite, the IJAMEA then performed a complex sealing ritual to sever the link between Momonokai and the corporeal world. This doomed most of what remained to slow starvation thanks to their inability to feed on human belief beyond the seal. Even SCP-6979 was exceptionally lucky for her breaches, fleeting as they were and requiring violence and fear to maintain. Discovering all this appalled the Foundation, who had no idea that the IJAMEA had hidden such atrocities from them. Perhaps in order to fully contain SCP-6979 and end the killings, they needed to make right the sins of their forebearers. At the forefront of these reparation efforts was Dr. Cho Yuyan. a Chinese researcher who headed the Foundation's illustrious Mythology and Folkloristics department. Cho was sympathetic to 6979's plight, given that her own ancestors had suffered horrific brutality at the hands of occupying Japanese forces during the Second World War. She provided a sympathetic ear to 6979, hearing the worst of what she experienced and vowing to both break the seal placed on the Momonokai and bring her and her people into the modern world. And over the course of the year that followed, astonishingly, Cho and her colleagues at the Foundation were able to keep their promise. Thanks to working closely with local esoteric groups, they figured out how to break the binding spell that the IJAMEA had formed all those decades ago. This allowed the free flow of belief to nourish the former Kuchisake Onna and her yokai brethren. Plans were even underway to construct a Foundation base in Momonokai itself. Meanwhile, Cho worked with 6979 personally, offering therapy and psychological counseling sessions, as well as helping to educate her on the modern world. Everything seemed to be going so well, except one little detail that made Cho profoundly uncomfortable. The history textbooks provided for her to teach SCP-6979 about the human world were sanitized. They engaged in revisionist history, particularly downplaying the monstrous war crimes committed by the Imperial Japanese Army in occupied territories, most notably in China. Cho brought this up to her superior, Site Director Sessho Mamiya, only to be told that these edits were for the best, and in the interest of not giving SCP-6979 any reason to turn against humanity after they'd made so much progress with her. Why focus on the past when they could instead turn their eyes to the future? Cho wasn't buying it. This was the pain of her people they were burying here in the interest of positive PR. Her attitude was that anything that could be destroyed by the truth deserved to be destroyed by the truth. Director Mamiya did not agree. He, in no uncertain terms, threatened her with terrible consequences if she brought this matter up again. They would present their narrative, no matter what, and insubordination would not be tolerated. But could the truth ever stay buried? And when it surfaces, would any seal be enough to lock it away again? Check out the DrBob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like SCP-2450, Teeth.